40 people lived because one woman smelled the water before anyone believed her. Boston, 1964. The lecture hall was too warm for October. Steam tapped faintly inside the old radiators, and the windows above the students were fogged at the edges, turning the city outside into a blur of brick, rain, and moving umbrellas. Young men in white coats sat in rows with notebooks open, pencils ready, faces still bright with the confidence of people who had not yet watched a patient die because someone listened too late. Major William H. Carter stood at the front of the room. He was no longer Major Carter, not officially. The Army had released him years ago. His hair had thinned. His left hand trembled slightly when he lifted a glass of water. Students knew him as Dr. Carter now, a retired military physician who had crossed Europe with the medical corps and carried enough war in his voice that no one interrupted him when he paused. On the table before him lay a small notebook. It did not look important. The cover was gray cloth, frayed at the corners and darkened by age. One edge had been burned, not badly, just enough to leave a brown crescent near the spine. A strip of linen had been tied around it to keep the pages from loosening. Beside it sat a tiny piece of soap, dry and cracked, wrapped in yellowed paper. A student in the second row leaned forward. "Sir, is that from the war?" Carter rested his hand on the notebook. "Yes. Your notes." He looked down. For a moment, the lecture hall disappeared. The polished floor became concrete dust. The radiator hiss became the clank of enamel basins. The rain against Boston glass became German rain dripping from a broken factory roof in May of 1945. "No," Carter said. "Not mine." The students waited. He opened the notebook to the first page. The paper had gone thin and rough. The handwriting inside was small, careful, and slightly slanted, as if written by someone saving space because paper had become precious. Across the top of the page, in German and English mixed together, were 3 words. "Water, not fever." Carter touched the line with one finger. "That," he said, "is why 40 people lived." No one wrote yet. Good, he thought. Some lessons should enter before the pencil moves. He looked at the rows of young faces. "You will spend years learning names for diseases," he said. "You will learn instruments, dosages, symptoms, procedures. You will learn to speak with certainty because patients are frightened and certainty sounds like mercy." He closed the notebook halfway. But medicine does not begin with certainty. It begins with noticing. A chair creaked near the back. Carter heard it as another sound. A jeep braking in mud. A stretcher leg scraping concrete. A woman speaking English with the careful precision of someone who had been ignored in 2 languages. Her name was Clara Weiss. 27 years old. White German. Nurse. Prisoner. Civilian. Enemy. None of those words had been large enough to contain what she saw that day. Carter had not believed her at first. That was the part he never softened when he told the story. He had been tired. Everyone had been tired. Germany had surrendered, but surrender did not empty the wards. It filled them. Refugees came from roads and cellars. Prisoners came from camps and hospitals and fields. Children arrived with swollen bellies. Old men arrived with pockets full of papers proving nothing. Women arrived carrying bundles, silence, and the last names of people no one could find. Cologne, May 1945. The American receiving station stood inside an abandoned brick factory on the edge of the city. Its chimney had been cracked by shellfire. Its windows were broken or boarded. Rainwater gathered in the yard, reflecting Jeep tires, stretcher poles, and the gray sky above a ruined country. The Army had made order from debris. Registration tables near the gate. A medical desk beneath the loading arch barracks inside the kiln rooms. A field infirmary where clay dust still coated the floor. Water barrels lined up near the wall. Behind the factory, half covered by weeds and rubble, was an old well. That was where the mistake began. And near the women's line, holding a cloth bag against her coat, Clara Weiss watched an American private fill a bucket from it. She did not speak. Not yet. She only looked at the water, then at the sick, then back at the water. The brick factory had been chosen because it still had walls. That was enough in May of 1945. A place did not need to be clean to become a hospital. It did not need proper windows, good floors, or rooms designed for mercy. It needed a roof that held most of the rain out, doors wide enough for stretchers, and enough space to separate the living from the dying before both were lost in the same crowd. Major William Carter had made the best of it. That was what he told himself as he moved through the yard with a clipboard in one hand and a tin cup of coffee going cold in the other. He had not slept more than 3 hours in 2 days. His shirt collar rubbed raw against his neck. His boots were stiff with clay mud. Every time he turned, someone needed a decision. Burn cases inside the East Kiln. Diarrhea cases near the washing station. Children and elderly in the warmer barack. Suspected fever behind the storage wall. New arrivals at the gate. No one had enough blankets. No one had enough sulfa. No one had enough hands. Captain Robert Hayes wanted the lines moving faster. He stood near the registration tables with 2 military policemen, his helmet low, his face set in the hard expression men used when fatigue had eaten away patience. If they can walk, they wait, Hayes said. Carter did not look up from the clipboard. If they collapse while waiting, they become my problem. They are already your problem. They are people first. Hayes gave him a glance. That kind of sentence sounded dangerous in a place full of defeated enemies. Carter knew it. He said it anyway. But knowing people were people did not mean he trusted them. Trust was a luxury no field station could afford. That morning, 6 German women were brought in from a transport point west of the city. They were searched, registered, and placed along the wall until someone decided where they belonged. Clara Weiss stood third in the line. She did not stand like the others. The others shifted from foot to foot, coughing into sleeves, scanning the yard for danger or food or someone who might speak their dialect. Clara stood still, not rigid, not proud, still in the way a nurse stands near a bed when listening for a breath that may not come again. Sergeant Thomas Miller noticed her before Carter did. Miller was broad, freckled, and quiet for an infantry sergeant. He had been assigned to the medical station after a shell fragment damaged his left shoulder badly enough to keep him away from the front, but not badly enough to send him home. He carried stretchers with one good arm and watched everything. He watched Clara watch the water barrels. He watched her eyes move from the barrels to the eastern barack, then to the well behind the factory, then back again. Miller did not know what to make of it. Captain Hayes did. "Keep an eye on that one," he said. Miller looked at him. "Why?" "Because she's looking too carefully." Miller almost answered that looking carefully was not a crime. Then he remembered where they were. Inside the women's line, Clara held her cloth bag tighter. In it were 3 things she had kept through collapse, transport, and search because no one had thought them worth stealing. A nurse's notebook, a strip of folded gauze, and a small piece of soap wrapped in paper. The soap mattered. Her mother had once told her that a nurse who could not stop death could still refuse filth. Clara had carried that sentence through Cologne, through cellars, through nights when the hospital shook and dust fell into open wounds. Now she smelled the factory yard. Wet brick, old clay, bodies, coffee, latrines dug too close to the drainage trench. And beneath it, faint but present, something sour rising from the water buckets. Not rot exactly, not chemicals, wrongness. A private filled another bucket from the well and carried it toward the eastern barack. Clara's gaze followed him. "Name," the clerk said. She turned back. Clara Weiss. Age, 27. Occupation. A pause. Nurse. The clerk looked up. Hayes heard it and stepped closer. "Nurse where?" "Field hospital. Cologne." "Before Aachen." "Military. Hospital." "That is not an answer." "It is the answer I have." Hayes studied her face. Carter, passing behind the table, heard only the last exchange. He glanced at Clara for the first time. A thin German woman in a wet, gray coat. Pale. Exhausted. Hands roughened by soap and cold water. Eyes lowered, but not empty. Hayes said, "Everyone becomes a nurse after surrender." Clara did not answer. Carter should have asked more. He would remember that later. But a child cried from the yard. A stretcher-bearer called his name. Someone shouted that an old man had stopped breathing near the gate. Carter turned away. "Put her with the others until we verify." The clerk wrote something beside her name. "Unconfirmed nurse." The words followed Clara into the yard like a closed door. She looked once toward the eastern barack. A man inside was vomiting into a bucket. Another called for water. An American private lifted the well bucket to pour. Clara stepped forward half an inch, then stopped. No one had asked her to notice. But the sick had already begun. By noon, the eastern barack had become louder than the yard. Not with shouting, with sickness. The sounds came in layers, tin buckets scraping concrete, water sloshing in cups, a woman retching behind a hanging blanket, a child crying without strength, men calling for help in voices too dry to carry far. Outside, the receiving station continued its work. Trucks arrived. Names were written. Guards pointed. Clerks stamped papers. The war had ended, and still the machinery of suffering required administration. Clara Weiss stood near the washing station with the other women, waiting to be assigned. Waiting, in a camp, was never empty. It was where people disappeared into decisions made elsewhere. She watched the Eastern Barak. The first man had begun vomiting shortly after the morning bucket was carried inside. Then another. Then a woman near the door. By midday, too many had the same hollow look around the eyes. Lips drying, skin dull, hands reaching for water and then losing what little they swallowed. The Americans saw misery. Clara saw sequence. At 9:10, water from the old well. At 9:40, stomach pain in the first row of cots. At 10:15, vomiting in the men nearest the door. At 11 o'clock, cramps spreading among those who had received the second bucket. Not fever first. Not rash. Not cough. Water first. She opened her cloth bag. The notebook was damp at the corners, but the pages inside had survived. She turned to an empty page and wrote carefully, using the stub of a pencil she had wrapped in thread. Eastern Barak. 40 persons. Same water. No high fever. Vomiting. Thirst. Weakness. She did not write accusation. Accusation wasted space. Patterns mattered more. Across the yard, Sergeant Miller lifted a crate of bandages with his good arm and saw her writing. He paused long enough for Captain Hayes to notice. "What is she doing now?" "Writing, sir." "I can see that." Hayes crossed the yard before Miller could say more. Clara heard his boots and closed the notebook. "Open it," Hayes said. She looked at him. "It is medical. It is German. It is still medical." His mouth tightened. In another hour, he might have taken it from her. In another camp, another officer might have called it suspicious and burned it in a stove. But a stretcher team passed between them carrying a boy with blood on his sleeve, and for a moment Hayes had to step aside. That was all the time Clara needed to look past him. A private was carrying another bucket from the well, toward the same barack. Her hand closed around the notebook. "No," she said. Hayes turned back. "What?" The word had escaped before she measured it. Too sharp. Too clear. The nearby women looked at her. Miller looked at her. Even the private with the bucket slowed. Clara stepped forward. "Do not give them that water." Hayes stared at her as if the sentence itself had violated orders. Major Carter, hearing the change in the yard's rhythm, looked up from the medical table. He had been cleaning a wound that smelled of infection and old cloth. Dr. Eleanor Brooks stood beside him, sorting ampoules with the quick hands of a woman who had learned to count supplies by touch. Carter removed his gloves. "What is it?" Hayes answered before Clara could. "She says not to give water to the sick." Clara looked at Carter then. His face was lined with fatigue, but his eyes were not stupid. That gave her a little courage. "Not that water," she said. Carter walked toward her. The yard narrowed. The private still held the bucket, arm trembling slightly from the weight. Behind him, someone in the Eastern Barak called for water again. The sound made Hayes impatient. "They're dehydrated," he said. "Now she wants to stop water." Clara shook her head. "They are sick because of it." Carter's expression changed by almost nothing. "Explain." She opened the notebook and turned it toward him. Her handwriting was small. English words mixed with German ones. Times. Symptoms. Arrows. 40 persons. Same well. Carter glanced at the page. Then at her. "You examined them?" "I watched them." "That is not the same." "No," Clara said. "But it is not nothing." Hayes gave a short laugh without humor. "Or she poisoned it, and now wants to look useful." The words crossed the yard quickly. Miller looked down. Clara did not. For 1 second, something old moved through her face. Not fear. Weariness. The kind that came from being doubted before being heard. Then it passed. "If I wished them dead," she said quietly, "I would say nothing." No one answered. The private lowered the bucket a few inches. Carter looked toward the old well behind the factory. Weeds around the stones. Mud running toward it from the broken yard. A drainage trench too close. A place chosen because water was needed and time was short. He looked back at the barack. 40 people. Vomiting. Thirsty. Calling for the thing that might be hurting them. Still, he did not believe her. Not yet. War had taught him that truth and lies often arrived in the same exhausted voice. "Set the bucket down," he said. Hayes turned sharply. "Major, set it down until we check." The private obeyed. Clara breathed once. But inside the barrack, a child began to cry harder. Then the crying stopped. The silence that followed moved faster than any order. The child was lying on the floor between two cots. A girl, perhaps 6 years old. Someone had tried to lift her and failed. Her mother knelt beside her with both hands hovering uselessly over the small body, afraid to touch the wrong place, afraid that not touching would be worse. The girl's dress was damp at the collar. Her lips had gone pale. Her eyelids trembled without opening. The eastern barrack closed around her. 40 sick people breathed the same sour air. Buckets stood near the walls. Blankets hung from wire to make little rooms that did not hide enough. The brick floor was cold beneath everyone's feet. Rain tapped through a gap in the roof and gathered in a dark patch near the door. Major Carter entered first. Dr. Brooks followed with her bag. Captain Hayes came behind them, then Sergeant Miller, then Clara Weiss, though Hayes turned at once when he saw her. She stays outside. Clara stopped at the threshold. Carter looked at the child. There was no time for argument, but enough time for a mistake. Let her in, he said. Hayes's jaw tightened. She is unverified. So is the cause. That ended it. Clara stepped inside. No one made room for her. Not at first. She moved between cots sideways, careful not to touch the people reaching for cups or pressing cloths against their mouths. Her eyes moved quickly. The girl on the floor. The buckets. The water stains. The men curled on their sides. The woman shaking under a blanket though her skin was not hot. Not fever. Not first. Carter knelt beside the child and checked her pulse. Fast. Thin. Her mouth was dry. Her eyes had sunk slightly. When Brooks lifted the girl's wrist, the skin did not settle back at once. Severe dehydration, Brooks said. Hayes looked at Clara as if the diagnosis accused him. Carter said, "Get boiled water." Clara answered before anyone moved. Not only water. Carter turned his head. She knew the danger in speaking again. Every word from her had to cross a border no American uniform had granted her permission to cross. But the child's breathing was shallow, and borders meant very little to a body failing in plain sight. Salt, Clara said. Sugar. Small amounts. Slowly. Brooks looked up. For oral rehydration? Clara did not know the English phrase. She knew the work. Water alone may come back out. She needs it to stay. Carter studied her. Behind him, the mother whispered the child's name again and again. Latte. 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 Carter stood. Miller. Boiled water. Salt. Sugar. Clean cups. Miller moved immediately. Hayes did not. Major, we do not know she is right. Carter's face hardened. We know the child is dying. The barrack heard that. So did Clara. Not dying as a grand word. Not dying as drama. Dying as a task that had entered the room and required hands. She knelt beside Latte and touched the girl's forehead with the back of her fingers. Cool sweat. No burning heat. She opened one eyelid gently. The eye moved, unfocused. Not too fast, Clara said. Brooks nodded. Small sips if she can swallow. Hayes stood near the door, torn between suspicion and the uncomfortable sight of competence. Clara had not panicked. She had not begged to be believed. She had entered the room and begun sorting the body into signs. Pulse, skin, mouth, eyes, breath, sequence. Miller returned with an enamel pitcher steaming faintly, a paper twist of salt, and sugar from the mess stores. Brooks mixed while Carter held the child's head slightly raised. Clara watched the proportions, then touched Brooks's wrist. Less salt. Brooks paused, then adjusted it. That small acceptance changed the room more than an order would have. The first spoonful touched Latte's lips. Most spilled down her chin. Clara wiped it away with a clean strip of gauze from her own bag. The second spoonful stayed longer. The girl swallowed once. Her mother covered her mouth and began to cry without sound. Carter looked toward the other cots. How many like this? Clara opened her notebook with one hand. 40 drank from the well. 23 vomiting. 9 very weak. 3 confused. This child first collapse. You counted. Yes. While you did not believe me. The sentence was not sharp. That made it sharper. Carter accepted it because the child swallowed again. Outside, thunder moved somewhere beyond the ruined factory. Inside, Brooks began issuing instructions. No well water. Boil everything. Separate the worst cases along this wall. Blankets under them, not just over them. Miller, mark the cots. Clara tore strips from the edge of an old bandage roll and tied them around the bed frames of the weakest patients. One strip, then another, then another. Red cloth for danger. White cloth for watch. No cloth for stable. The Americans followed. Not because they trusted her fully, because the pattern had begun to make itself visible. Carter stood in the center of the barack with his hands still wet from the child's face and understood, with a physician's cold dread, how close they had come to giving poisoned mercy. Water to the thirsty. Harm in the shape of help. He looked at Clara Weiss. She was bent over latte again, holding the cup steady, waiting for one more swallow. Nobody had believed the German nurse. But the first life had just begun to return. The change began with a bucket being carried away. Not a speech, not an admission. A bucket. Sergeant Miller lifted it from the barack floor with both hands, though one shoulder still pained him in cold weather. The water inside looked harmless. Clear enough. Ordinary enough. A little mud along the rim. A faint sour smell that seemed stronger now that everyone knew to notice it. He carried it outside and poured it into the drainage ditch. No one drank. That was the first order that saved them. Major Carter stood in the eastern barack with Dr. Brooks beside him and Clara Weiss kneeling near Latte's cot. The child had swallowed 4 small spoonfuls. Not much. Barely anything. But the fluttering in her eyelids had slowed. Her breathing had steadied by a fraction. In medicine, fractions mattered. A little less blue at the lips. A pulse not quite so thin. A swallow where there had been silence. Carter looked around the room and saw the illness differently now. It had been there all morning, but belief had arrived late. Too late, almost. The same cracked mouths. The same sunken eyes. The same stomach cramps coming in waves. Men and women reaching for water as if reaching for rescue. And the rescue had been wrong. Close the well, he said. Hayes looked at him. Until we test it. Carter turned. Close it. This time, Hayes did not argue. He stepped outside and shouted for 2 military policemen to rope off the well behind the factory. His voice carried across the yard, hard and clipped, but something in it had changed. Suspicion was still there. So was embarrassment. But urgency had taken command of both. Inside, Brooks had cleared a table. Boiled water only, she said. Salt. Sugar. Small amounts. No one drinks fast. No one drinks from the well. We mark every patient by severity. Clara listened, then added quietly, those who cannot sit must be turned. Vomit can choke them. Brooks nodded at once. You heard her, Carter said. The words moved through the American orderlies like a second shock. You heard her. Not watch her. Not restrain her. Heard her. Clara did not look up. Praise, like suspicion, could waste time. She held Latte's chin gently and waited until the child swallowed again. Then she wiped the corner of the girl's mouth with gauze. Her hands were steady, though the skin around her knuckles was cracked from cold and soap. Miller returned with more water, this time boiled from the kitchen stove. Steam rose from the enamel pitcher. Behind him came 2 privates with sacks from the mess stores, salt, sugar, clean cups, and a stack of blankets taken from a supply crate someone had been saving for later. Later had become now. Carter pointed to the long table. Mix under Dr. Brooks's supervision. Clara turned her head. Small batches, she said. If too much salt, worse. One private froze. Brooks repeated it in sharper English. Small batches. Measure it. Taste it before giving it. The men obeyed. Not gracefully, but completely. By mid-afternoon, the barack had become a rhythm. Clara moved from cot to cot with her notebook open in one hand. Red cloth tied to the bed frames of the worst. White cloth for those who needed watching. No cloth for those stable enough to wait. Brooks checked pulses. Carter examined the confused and the collapsed. Miller carried cups, blankets, basins, whatever hands could carry. Hayes stood at the door and counted. 40. He counted them 3 times. 40 people connected by a mistake no one had wanted to see. A woman near the wall began cramping so violently that her husband shouted for help. Clara reached her first. She did not push him away. She placed his hand on the woman's shoulder and said in German, low and firm, that he must keep her turned on her side. He obeyed because she spoke like someone who expected life to continue. Across the room, Latte opened her eyes. Only halfway. Only for a second. But her mother saw it and made a sound too small to be called a cry. Carter heard it from the table. He looked at Clara. She was already writing the time down. That was when he understood the depth of his error. Clara had not been guessing. She had been recording. While he sorted the camp by categories, she had sorted the suffering by sequence. While Hayes watched her as a possible threat, she had watched the water as the real one. Carter walked to the doorway. The old well stood beyond the factory, circled now with rope and 2 armed guards who looked embarrassed to be guarding stones. Rainwater ran along the yard toward it, carrying ash, mud, and whatever the broken weeks had left behind. A simple thing, a necessary thing, a deadly thing. He returned to the barack and found Clara rinsing her hands in a basin. The water turned gray around her fingers. "You were right," he said. She did not answer at once. She dried her hands on a strip of linen, then looked toward the cots. Not yet. Carter followed her gaze. 40 people. Some breathing easier. Some still curled in pain. Some balanced on the edge where a wrong hour could still take them. Clara closed her notebook. "Right as morning," she said. And then she went back to work. By evening, the Eastern Barack no longer sounded like a place waiting to lose people. It sounded like work. Cups tapped against wooden crates. Enamel pitchers were filled, emptied, rinsed, filled again. Boots crossed the concrete in steady lines instead of frantic circles. Men who had never imagined taking instructions from a German nurse now washed her hands before they moved their own. Clara Weiss did not command loudly. She pointed. She counted. She corrected. "Not so fast. Turn him. Wait before the next sip. Check her hands. They are cold." Each sentence was small. Each one kept someone closer to morning. Major Carter had seen battlefields where noise became useless. Men screamed. Officers shouted. Shells erased commands before they landed. But in the barack that night, the quiet instructions carried farther than shouting ever could. They entered the hands of the orderlies. They changed the pace of the room. That was how 40 people were kept alive. Not all at once. One swallow at a time. Dr. Brooks set up a table near the center aisle and made it the heart of the ward. On it stood salt, sugar, boiled water, cloth strips, a pocket watch, and Clara's notebook opened flat beneath a lamp. The page had become a map of suffering. Names where names were known, cot numbers where they were not, times, symptoms, reactions, improvements measured in the smallest possible victories. Latte Bauer, swallowed 6 spoonfuls. Man by north wall, vomiting less. Woman near stove, pulse stronger. Unknown elderly male, confused, watch closely. Carter read over Clara's shoulder once. He expected disorder. He found precision, better than some reports from trained officers. He said nothing. Silence, for once, was not disbelief. It was respect learning how to stand. Outside, the well remained roped off under 2 lanterns. Hayes had sent a private to fetch water from a pump near the church ruins, then ordered every barrel in the yard scrubbed before use. He still avoided Clara's eyes when he entered the barack, but he no longer questioned the cloth colors tied to the cots. Red, white, none, danger, watch, wait. A system born from a torn bandage and the refusal to waste time. Near midnight, Latte vomited again. Her mother made a broken sound and reached for her, but Clara was already there. She turned the child gently onto her side, cleared her mouth, lifted her head, and waited. Brooks came with a cloth, Carter with the cup, Miller with a blanket warmed near the stove. No one asked who was in charge. The child breathed, ragged, then steadier. Clara touched 2 fingers to the small wrist and closed her eyes for half a second, not in prayer exactly, but in calculation. Pulse, breath, color, time. She rests now, Clara said. The mother kissed Clara's sleeve. Clara did not pull away. She also did not smile. There was still too much night left. At 2 in the morning, one of the elderly men stopped responding. Carter thought they had lost him. His skin had cooled. His pulse seemed to vanish beneath the paper-thin wrist. Hayes stood at the foot of the cot with a lantern, face pale in the yellow light. Clara leaned close to the man's mouth. Not gone, she said. Carter checked again. There. Barely. But there. They lifted his feet, wrapped him tighter, wet his lips, gave him less than a spoonful at a time. Brooks muttered that it might not be enough. Clara answered without looking up. Enough is not always large. The sentence stayed with Carter. By 4, the barack smelled of salt water, sour cloth, sweat, smoke, and soap. Clara's little piece of soap had been used until it was nearly transparent. She washed her hands after each worst case, not because the water was clean enough to make it perfect, but because refusal mattered. Filth was not always defeated. Sometimes it was resisted. Miller brought her coffee. She forgot to drink it. He brought another, hotter. This time she held the cup between both hands for warmth. "You should sit," he said. "I am sitting. You're standing." She looked down, as if surprised to find he was right. Then she moved to the next cot. Just before dawn, the room changed. Not visibly at first. No trumpet of recovery. No sudden miracle. Only fewer buckets being lifted. Fewer bodies folding around cramps. Fewer voices asking for water, and more hands able to hold cups by themselves. Carter stepped outside when the sky began to lighten. The factory yard lay under a thin gray mist. The well rope sagged with dew. Beyond the broken chimney, Cologne was a dark outline of walls, steeples, and empty windows. A ruined country waking to another day it had not earned, but had been given anyway. Brooks came to the doorway. "How many?" Carter looked back into the barack. 40 cots. 40 breathing bodies. Some weak. Some sleeping. Some still in danger. But alive. "All of them," he said. Brooks nodded once, too tired to smile. Inside, Clara Weiss stood over her notebook and wrote the final line of the night. "Morning. No deaths." Then she closed the cover with both hands. Nobody cheered. No one had strength for that. But every American in the room knew what had happened. Nobody had believed the German nurse. Until 40 lives were still there to prove her right. Morning did not bring relief. It brought counting. Major Carter stood at the foot of each cot with Dr. Brooks beside him and Clara Weiss half a step behind, notebook open, pencil ready, face pale from a night without sleep. The eastern barack smelled of cooled stove smoke, sour blankets, boiled water, and the faint sharpness of soap. Rain tapped softly through the broken roof, falling into a basin someone had placed beneath the leak. 40 patients, 40 pulses, 40 names, or numbers where names had not yet been found. Carter counted them once. Then again. He did not trust miracles. Medicine had taught him that the body could improve just long enough to betray hope. So he checked the weakest twice. Lotte Bauer first. The elderly man near the north wall second. The woman who had cramped through midnight third. Each still carried danger beneath the skin, but none had crossed the line Clara had watched all night. Alive. The word felt too large to say aloud. Captain Hayes entered after sunrise with a typed report in one hand and mud on his boots. He stopped near the door, perhaps expecting accusation, perhaps preparing to defend himself against it. No one gave him either. Clara was tying a clean strip of cloth to a bed frame. White now, not red. Hayes watched the change. "She improved?" he asked. Clara did not look up. She swallowed. She slept. Her hands are warm. Hayes nodded, as if those facts belonged on an official form. Maybe they did. He walked to Carter and lowered his voice. "What do I put in the report?" Carter looked around the barack. The answer should have been simple. Suspected contaminated well. Emergency rehydration. 40 affected. No deaths. But paperwork had a way of shrinking moral failure into weather. He took the report from Hayes and wrote in the margin himself. Water source unsafe. Nurse Weiss identified pattern before medical staff confirmed. Hayes read the line. His jaw moved once. "You want her name in it." Carter handed the paper back. She earned it. Across the room, Clara heard her name, but did not turn. Recognition was another sound a nurse could not spend while patients still needed watching. Sergeant Miller came in carrying a crate of clean cups. He placed them on the table and paused beside Clara. "Morning, Nurse Weiss." The title moved through the room quietly. Not prisoner. Not German. Nurse. Clara's hand stopped for only a second. Then she continued writing. By noon, the barack had become orderly in a different way. Not faster. Better. The worst patients were near the stove. The stable ones near the wall. Water was boiled in rotation. Every cup was marked. Every person was given small amounts at intervals Clara had written in her notebook. American orderlies followed the chart without being told twice. One young private misread the cloth system and brought a full cup to a red-marked patient. Clara caught his wrist gently before he could give it. "Too much," she said. The private froze, then nodded. "Small sips." "Yes." He repeated it to himself as he moved away. "Small sips." The phrase spread through the barack like a second kind of medicine. Outside, the old well was boarded over. Not just roped. Boarded. Hayes had ordered it before Carter asked. 2 planks crossed the stone mouth, nailed down by military policemen who avoided looking into the dark water below. Carter saw Clara watching through the doorway. "You were right about the well," he said. She looked at the boards. "I was right about the people." He did not answer at once. The correction was gentle. It still corrected him. That afternoon, Dr. Brooks asked Clara to help sort new arrivals before they reached the Eastern Baroque. Hayes did not object. Miller brought her a chair. Carter cleared a place for her notebook on the medical desk beneath the loading arch. Clara stood there for a moment, looking at the empty space as if it were a question. "You'll work here," Carter said. "I am still under guard." "Yes." "And German." "Yes." "And you still need me?" Carter looked toward the Baroque where 40 people breathed because she had noticed what Rank had missed. "Yes," he said. "We do." Clara placed her notebook on the desk. Not proudly, not timidly, carefully, like setting down an instrument. A truck arrived before evening with another group from the North Road. The receiving station stirred again. Clerks lifting pencils, guards tightening lines, stretchers moving through puddles. The day resumed its demands. This time, when a sick woman stumbled at the gate, no one waved her forward blindly. Miller looked to Clara. Brooks looked to Clara. Even Hayes waited. Clara stepped toward the woman and touched 2 fingers to her wrist. The yard quieted by degrees. Not because she had authority, because she had earned attention. Carter watched from beside the medical table, tired beyond language, and understood that the camp had changed in less than a day. Not because the war had ended, because someone who had been dismissed as enemy had refused to stop noticing. Clara looked at the woman's lips, then eyes, then hands. "Warmth first," she said. The orderlies moved. No one asked if they should believe her. That had already been answered by 40 breathing bodies in the Eastern Baroque. By the second morning, the Eastern Baroque no longer belonged to panic. It belonged to routine. That was how survival entered the factory, not as triumph, but as repeated motion. Boil the water. Cool it. Mix carefully. Taste first. Give slowly. Wait. Watch the hands. Watch the eyes. Mark the time. Return before the body had to ask. Clara Weiss wrote all of it in her notebook. Her handwriting stayed neat, even when her wrist trembled. The American orderlies had begun to read her marks before asking questions. Red cloth meant danger. White cloth meant watch. No cloth meant stable. The system looked too simple to have saved anyone. Yet it had turned the long night into something the room could obey. Major Carter saw that. He saw Miller carrying cups 2 at a time, repeating small sips, under his breath like a prayer he did not believe in but needed anyway. He saw Hayes standing at the doorway, no longer searching Clara's movements for sabotage, but for instruction. He saw Dr. Brooks checking Clara's notes before adjusting the list of patients. And he saw Clara herself. Gray coat rolled at the sleeves. Hair loosened from its pins. Face drawn by exhaustion. Hands cracked from soap and cold water. Moving from cot to cot with the same calm precision she had carried before anyone trusted her. She had not changed. Only the room around her had. Near noon, Lotte Bauer sat up for the first time. Not far. Not long. Her mother supported her back with both hands while Clara held the cup and waited. The child drank 3 small swallows, then leaned against her mother's shoulder, eyes half closed. Carter watched from the table. Something in him loosened. 40 people had not been saved all at once. He understood that now. They had been held back from losing, inch by inch, through an attention so ordinary it might have been missed by men looking only for dramatic cures. Clara closed her notebook and washed her hands in a basin. The water turned gray. The soap was almost gone. Carter walked to her. "Nurse Weiss." She looked up. The title no longer surprised her, but she still did not receive it carelessly. "Yes, Major. I'll need you on the intake line this afternoon." "I will work." "That wasn't what I meant." She waited. He took off his gloves slowly, buying himself a second. Men like Carter found it easier to order supplies than admit error. Supplies did not look back. "I should have listened sooner," he said. The factory seemed to quiet around the sentence. Clara dried her hands on linen. "You listened before morning." It was not forgiveness. It was measurement. Accurate. Merciful only because it was true. Carter nodded once. Across the Baroque, Hayes cleared his throat. A new truck had arrived at the gate. More civilians. More prisoners. More hunger and fever and papers that might be wrong. The work did not end because 40 had lived. War never ended that neatly. Clara lifted her notebook. Before stepping away, she tore one small page from the back and placed it on Carter's table. On it were the words she had written the night before. Water, not fever. Beneath them, 40 short marks. One for each life. Carter looked at the page. "Your record." "For yours," Clara said. He frowned slightly. You should keep it. I have the lesson. Then she took the nearly vanished piece of soap, washed her hands once more, and walked toward the yard. Outside, sunlight had broken through the clouds for the first time in days. It touched the boarded well, the mud, the factory wall, and the line of new arrivals waiting beneath American rifles. Clara stepped into that light, without ceremony. No one applauded. No one called her a hero. Miller simply moved a chair beside the intake table. Brooks opened a clean ledger. Hayes ordered the guards to bring the weakest forward first. And Carter, standing in the barack with the torn page in his hand, understood that respect had entered the camp quietly. Not through victory. Through evidence. Through 40 people breathing. Through a German nurse who had never asked to be believed, only allowed to notice before it was too late. By the time Carter returned to Boston, the torn page had become softer at the folds. He had carried it through field hospitals, transport ships, army offices, and finally into civilian life, where men wore clean coats and spoke of medicine without the smell of wet brick in their throats. The page survived inside an envelope marked only with a date. May 1945. Cologne. Water, not fever. For years, Carter told himself he kept it as a teaching aid. That was partly true. He showed it to young doctors when they became too fond of quick answers. He placed it beside charts and asked them what they saw. Most saw symptoms. Some saw dehydration. A few saw contaminated water. Almost none saw the lesson until he told them about the woman who wrote it. Clara Weiss, German nurse. Unconfirmed at intake. Believed too late, but not too late to save them. He never knew what became of her. That absence remained with him more sharply than he expected. After the war, records scattered like ash. People moved under new names, old names, married names, missing names. Hospitals reopened. Camps closed. Files were boxed, burned, misplaced, translated badly, or sent to offices where no one remembered why they mattered. Carter wrote once to a medical registry in Cologne. No answer came. He wrote again to a hospital near Aachen. The reply was polite and incomplete. Many nurses had served. Many lists were destroyed. Many women named Weiss could not be traced with certainty. He folded the letter and placed it behind the torn page. Then he stopped searching, not because he forgot, because some people leave only the work behind, and the work becomes the memorial. Boston, 1964. The lecture hall stayed silent after Carter finished the story. Outside, rain moved along the tall windows. Inside, the young medical students sat with their notebooks open but their pencils still. The old doctor looked at them and saw the danger of clean rooms. Not arrogance exactly. Something quieter. The belief that if a thing was printed clearly enough, measured neatly enough, named correctly enough, it could not still be missed. He knew better. He lifted the gray notebook from the table. It was not complete. Clara had left it behind when she was transferred 2 days after the well was boarded. Carter had found it in the intake room, beside the basin where the little piece of soap had finally broken into 2 thin flakes. Inside were patient notes, water times, cloth marks, and names corrected in careful German script. No grand words. No complaint. No hatred. Only attention. A student in the front row finally spoke. Did she know she saved 40 people? Carter looked at the notebook. I think she knew 40 people were alive, he said. That is not always the same thing. The student lowered his eyes. Another asked, why didn't they believe her? Carter could have given the easy answer. Because she was German. Because we were tired. Because war teaches suspicion faster than wisdom. All of that was true. None of it was enough. Because she was quiet, he said. And we mistook quiet for uncertainty. He opened the notebook to the page with the torn edge, where its missing half had once been. Then he placed the loose page beside it. Water, not fever. 40 marks beneath. 1 for each life. The room leaned toward it without moving. Carter rested both hands on the table. His left hand trembled. This time he did not hide it. The hardest thing in medicine, he said, is not knowing more. It is listening sooner. The sentence settled slowly. Like dust after shellfire. Like rain after heat. Like a truth finally allowed to stand without defending itself. Years later, some of those students would forget the date, the city, even Carter's name. They would remember the page. They would remember the German nurse who counted symptoms while stronger men counted categories. They would remember that 40 lives had depended on a pattern no one wanted to see. Carter closed the notebook. The lecture was over. But no one rose. For a moment, the hall held the same kind of silence that had once filled the brick factory after morning came, and every cot still held a breathing body. Not applause, not victory, recognition. Carter wrapped the notebook again in its strip of linen and placed the cracked soap beside it. Small things, ordinary things. A page, a notebook, a piece of soap worn almost to nothing by a woman who believed care began with clean hands and accurate attention. He looked once more at the students. She was not believed because she was German, he said. She was remembered because she was right. Then he picked up the glass of water on the table, held it for a moment, and did not drink. Some lessons, he had learned, should never become casual again.